Good morning, everyone. Well, you can tell it's morning here. It's pretty daylight out there. Anyway, this is a first of its kind video in that I'm going to kind of react uh, and discuss some other videos and some other things that people have put up in response to the periodic table of elements. I am so thankful that my viewers and listeners keep sending me things to check out because I don't learn things unless I read a whole bunch of things. That is what a good academic does. They take the stuff they agree with, along with the stuff that they don't agree with or that they don't understand. They put all the pieces into a big pile, into a big soup. They figure out everything, and then they pull out the stuff. Well, I can't say soup because I eat the whole thing. Otherwise, I don't put stuff in there I like. But you put everything into a pile, you start wading through it, and you pull out the stuff that's good along with this, and then get rid of the stuff that, not so much. And so this is partially to explain the musical pieces. I am a musician. I am a trained musician with a doctoral degree in music. So I understand music theory, music history, and how music works. Now, any of those people who are musical acousticians or they work with musical acoustics, they have degrees in physics, but are also musicians who understand music theory. Those people will also understand this. I was a performer and had to have, excuse me, way more music theory and history than I desired at that time in my life. But all of that is coming back to me now, and I still have to go back and refresh my memory because ear training is not one of those things that you just have forever. You have to practice it just like you have to practice your instrument. So when I sit down and someone gives me dictation on a piece of music, which I'll pull up an example here. Someone wrote a song, and I literally took that song, listened to it without going to a piano, and wrote down all the notes and all the rhythms. That's ear training. So in order to really determine what's going on with the musical frequencies of the periodic table, you got to understand some music theory and you got to be able to do some ear training. All the other stuff that comes is out of the limited knowledge. With that, I love PowerPoint presentations. So let us begin. Here we go. Let me share my screen. And we will start at the very beginning. You can sing along if you'd like. Okay, and I'm going to move my cute little picture up here while we wait for the curtain to draw back. There has to be some theatrical parts to this too. So this presentation is titled Musical Frequencies of the Periodic Table. And I don't normally use my academic stuff, but this is an academic presentation where I try, in general terms, layman's terms, to understand the musical pieces that go along with this. A lot of this information is in other videos and other blog posts. All righty, so with that, let me go to the next screen. Here's the barometer of which I use for all of this. Not everyone has all the answers, including myself. I don't understand the chemical and all those pieces of the periodic table. But if someone comes out and says there's a musical component, I understand that. I can figure out whether it's right or whether it's wrong. We each have a part to add to the cosmic puzzle. Mine is the musical piece. We spend more time trying to prove what's wrong rather than what's right. Unfortunately, that's our current culture because we want to be right. So therefore, if we say we're right and point out someone else is wrong, that makes us feel better about ourselves. Okay. Been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, wore it. It didn't work out too well for me. We need to learn how to work with those we disagree with because they may have the one piece that we need, even if everything else they say is wrong. That's where we miss it. I've missed it a bazillion times. Yeah, that's quite a lot. Modern science has only partial answers because they look at it from one position only. We are conscious beings in a conscious universe. Science is still trying to explain that connection. And it's really fascinating watching them try to do it. Here's the basics. If it moves, it has a frequency. Every time you look at something under a microscope slide, it's wiggling. Atoms wiggle. Every picture or something that they've generated, you see the thing wiggling around. I'm thinking, well, if it's moving, there's a frequency to it. What is the frequency? Everything in the universe is moving. Therefore, everything in the universe has a frequency. And we see frequencies on a spectrum, which I'll bring that up here in a minute. Some frequencies are felt, others are heard, others are seen, others we are completely oblivious to, but we know they're in use. All frequencies have motion. We simply measure them differently. Color frequencies are measured in nanometers, and musical frequencies are measured in hertz. It is possible to find musical frequencies for the elements because they are in motion. They move, therefore, they have a frequency. Here's a look at what we do know. And of course, I had to go find a periodic table of elements that looks different than our standard, because I'm trying to get us to think outside the box. The universe was created through elements. We see those on the periodic table. This is what I have found. Information from the following sources. Walter Russell, he was born in the 1800s. There's a school now called the University of Science and Philosophy. I haven't looked into it enough to see if that was something he started or if that was something others started. I perused the website a little bit, but I haven't delved further into it because I was specifically looking for things on the periodic table. Russell Smith, his website is thedogteachings.com. It's literally what it is. He also has a YouTube channel where he describes a lot of his stuff. My research into Walter Russell's table of elements led me to find Russell Smith. I find it fascinating that the last name becomes the first name for someone else. Then I've seen a lot from Daniel Winter on YouTube, as well as his website, fractalfield.com. And that's fractalfield.com. Then I found the Interactive Atomic Spectra, which is at atomic-spectra.net. You can go in there and you can type in any element and you can look and see the colors associated with that element when the element is being burnt. Now I realize that's a different frequency. When something is being burnt, it's going to put off a different spectra than when it's in its natural state. So I have to keep that. Then several people sent me the Joe Rogan interview with Terrence Howard, of which I listened to the whole thing once and then went back and took exact notes on what Terrence Howard said about the periodic table of elements. I've also, over the last 5 or 6 years, watched a ton of YouTube videos and seen a variety of blog posts on the topic as well. So I've been looking into this for quite some time. Everyone has a piece of the puzzle. We cannot throw out an entire idea, even if some of it's wrong. There's always truth in every lie. It just might be slightly twisted, but there's generally some truth in there. You have to dig around and get rid of the lie part and pull out the truth. So that's just an example. Many literal scientists don't understand consciousness because it doesn't fit into a nice equation. Science wants to put everything into a cute little box and it sit in the box, but consciousness does not fit into a box. You have to measure it differently. We do know this. We are an entire being. We are a spirit, soul, and body. A lot of people call the soul the mind. But as I say in something else I'm doing a teaching, the mind is in the soul. It's a portion of the soul. So we must learn to function as a full unit, spirit, soul, and body, And that includes consciousness. Some of us are so focused on what's going on with our emotions that we forget about the consciousness part. All of those mentioned on the left, in the left column here, have their own puzzle piece, but none of them have the entire picture. So when you are looking to find something, you're going to have to check out different sources, which is what any good academic should do. We are responsible for providing our own puzzle piece. When we do not look at an opposite perspective, that is a completely opposite view of what we have, we will often miss pieces. So here's an example of the traditional periodic table. Just in case people are not familiar, I pulled up a nice little picture, of which I have this picture on my wall in my office. Here is a picture of Walter Russell's periodic table, which this is kind of fuzzy because I just did a screenshot from a video. I can't remember. I think it was the video where Rogan was interviewing Terrence. It's kind of fuzzy here. I have ordered a copy of this so I can put it on the wall with the other periodic table, because there's a lot of truth in both of them. We just have to connect some dots. We have to view it from a different position. Colors of the periodic table. In looking at all of the ones that are out there, colors of elements and periods are shown within both tables. It does not appear colors were assigned based on actual colors of the elements. Therefore, we can assume it's necessary to find element colors measured in nanometers, or we determine frequency using another method. So that's where I am with that. It doesn't matter who has been talking about it, and a lot of the colors that they've assigned aren't working, which has made it a little bit difficult for me to figure some things out. But what I do know is we have a frequency spectrum of which shows you here's visible light, and you've got sound way down in here. And all you do is you take the visible light, whatever this spectrum is, you divide it, keep dividing it by 2 a bazillion times, well, not quite that many, until you get down into the hertz range. Then you have a sound audible representation of a visible spectrum. And musicians and composers will actually, when they hear certain keys, they're going to hear them in a color. A lot of them, and there's a terminology, there's a term that goes with that, but I can't remember what it is at the moment. If you know what it is, put it in the comments below. Translating nanometers to hertz. It's a mathematical step of dividing a large number by 2 until you get within the hertz frequency range. It's a lot lower, so of course you're not going to hear sound frequencies. You just have to bring it up into an audible range as a representation of what that sounds like, because everything is in octaves. A C is a C, and there's 8 of them on the piano. They all sound like a C, they're just higher versions of it. So there are 2 separate charts that show which nanometer equals which musical frequency. The chart that shows C as green and G as red is the correct chart. We've done the math a number of times. I've had mathematicians check it out just to make sure that I am clueful and that I have it right. And that chart looks like this. And this is 1 octave of visible light, but octaves are doubled. They become the same thing, just at a higher frequency. You can see here on a piano keyboard, all the C's are green. All of the D's are kind of this, I don't know what you call this, blue. E's are violet. And you've got F and F sharp in kind of like the ultraviolet, they call it intra and ultraviolet ranges. And you see they just turn around and one becomes another. So all of these here, and that'll show you A440 hertz is an A on the piano. Now, even if it's 432, it's going to be a little bit further down here. So until you get to the G sharp, which is going to be in the red orange range. And we measure frequencies in cents, musical frequencies in cents. So even if you're at 415, A415, or A450, or A460, it's still going to be within the orange color. Okay, so let us go to the next page. Color and musical frequency chart. Here they are again. You're going to see A, and this is when it's 440 hertz. Again, now this is the thing that I didn't understand when I was first taking music theory, because they didn't really talk about, you don't learn about this stuff until you're in a master's or doctoral program and that you're studying composition, or if you're studying music history. I was a performance major, so everything I did is to learn everything about the clarinet that I never wanted to know or ever wanted to know, and learn all the literature that's ever been written for clarinet, which I did. So when it came to studying music history, you look at the original keyboards, some of the flat keys were split into sharps and flats. So you're going to notice A sharp is a lower frequency than B flat. B and C on the piano, B and C flat on the piano are the same note. But in reality, B is a slightly lower pitch than C flat. And then B sharp, which is a C, is a higher pitch than C flat, but it's still lower than C. And I thought this was a great chart to show the difference in pitches. And you're thinking, why is that? I'm not going to go into the details here because I do that in some other things, but I'll explain it a little bit more layman's terms. Musical pitches are measured in hertz. It wasn't until we had the ability to measure frequencies in the 1800s that we could actually assign hertz to a specific note. Before that, you couldn't do it. Welcome the Industrial Revolution. Tuning requires adjustments between intervals, and an interval is a distance between two separate notes. So tuning requires adjustments between intervals so that the interval is correct. The interval of a major second is going to be different than a minor second. A minor third is narrower than a major third. A perfect fourth is even a larger leap. So those are all musical intervals. In early keyboard instruments, sharps were lower in pitch and flats were higher in pitch, which I showed you on the previous slide. The adjustment was required for intervals, I can't talk, to sound correct. We didn't notice this problem until the invention of keyboard instruments. Then you start having orchestras. Then you start having composers who want to write things in more keys than what was going on. That led to Bach writing the Well-Tempered Clavier, which showed by making a few adjustments, which was close to equal temperament, but it wasn't quite equal temperament. Because remember, in Bach's time, you couldn't measure. You could only do it by ear. Everything was done by ear until measurements came out. So upon the invention and the introduction of an orchestra with all the instruments, string instruments, brass instruments, woodwinds, percussion, that just added more convoluted mess into the musical whatever, because no two instruments are going to respond the same to humidity and temperature and blah, 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 blah. Welcome to the land of playing in an ensemble. Musical frequencies and intervals. Everything about musical frequencies involves intervals, which is the distance between two separate notes. All scales are built on the size of that distance between notes. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about an Eastern scale or a Western scale, or an ancient scale that's 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years old. Intervals rule. Everything is based on the distance from one note to the next note. All temperaments are determined by the distance between notes. Equal temperament means all the distances are equal distance. Mean tone is what Bach used, so some intervals were wider than others. Just intonation is a slight variation on Pythagorean tuning, where the 6th and the 7th degree of the scale are slightly lower than they are in Pythagorean tuning. There is no historical evidence to show any concert pitch was favored over another. Again, if you don't have a way of measuring it, then you can't determine that there was one specific concert pitch. Our biggest clue was we have found tuning forks, and there are organs, but they change according to temperature and humidity as well. So you can never completely say that an organ that was built in the 1700s is playing at the same concert pitch now that it did then. Okay, moving along. Intervals appear to be the deciding factor in how the universe is ordered. That much I figured out. So now we enter modern discussions. With the invention of measuring devices in the 1800s, many have attempted to explain how the universe works using measurements. That's a good thing. Here's the nuts and bolts. Terrence Howard was on the Joe Rogan show, and this is, I believe, May of 2024, and said that the periodic table is based on musical octaves. I went in, I downloaded everything. I spent hours going over that, trying to make it fit into octaves. Then I'm reading a bunch of other articles, and I realized, oh, octaves mean a cycle. It's not talking about a literal octave. That changed everything. Howard's musical description of the periodic table needs adjustments to fit within the natural laws of music. He literally says certain elements are octaves of other elements, but that can't be because they don't line up on that chart of Walter Russell's. And that's where I was running into problems, because it wasn't lining up with the laws of music. Walter Russell's terminology is difficult to decipher. He used the word octave. A normal person is going to say, oh, that's 8 notes apart. It's the same note, an octave higher. But he really means cycle. Or others say octaves represent how energy is distributed. And then you add that within a cycle. That makes total sense. So then I can take the word octave and then translate that to mean a cycle. Now we just have to figure out what that cycle is. Musicians who don't understand the inner workings of music theory and ear training, of which we used to call ear straining in college, maybe because it was always at 8 o'clock in the morning and I could never figure out why they did that. Anyway, back to the presentation. Musicians who don't understand the inner workings of music theory or ear training can only explain minimal portions of the musical puzzle. Most everybody understands what an octave is and that there are 7 notes. So if they hear a term that says this is with this, these are octave representations, they're going to try to fit all 7 notes within there because that's the limited musical understanding that they have. I get that. The ability to read sheet music and understand musical intervals is required to assign musical frequencies to the periodic table of elements. And even with all of my training, it took me a week of nonstop working on it, maybe longer, to decipher it. The natural laws of music. Everything is based on the musical harmonic series and the natural laws of tuning and cycles within the universe. You have to consider all 3 of these things, which I call a bench of 3, which is a 3-stranded cord that works together. You have to have 3 pieces in order to find the answers, whether it's in music or whether it's in math or whether it's in science. There's more than just natural equation science. There are other ways of explaining things beyond the one thing that we know. This is what I found. And this visual comes from Russell Smith from the Dog Teachings. It all lines up with what he found lines up with the musical harmonic series. It all lines up with the natural laws of tuning. And it's based on musical intervals, which I had discovered earlier, probably 7 or 8 years ago. Russell Smith, he has the most in-depth research on this, and he actually has specific frequencies. It was a matter of translating those specific frequencies into musical notes, which was where the hard part came in because of tuning. And this is where I describe this in my Frequencies of Creation, part 7. And I'm going to read some of this, which means I have to get close to the screen. And I say that this is the final post in the Frequencies of Creation series. And I say that Russell Smith he found the universal weave that was based on teachings of a man named Gurdjieff. I don't know how to say that. He didn't connect the periodic table with it until he saw that the family groups in his diagram perfectly matched the 4 families of the periodic table. He called these the law of threes. There I'm going back to that bench of 3, which forms a governmental authority. It brings the picture in when you've got a 3-stranded cord that can't be ripped apart. Those are 3 things. I mean, if you look at governments, you have your judicial, your legislative, and your executive branch. They're supposed to work together. But when we separate things out, it becomes cattywampus and chaotic. Okay? So I'm going to read some of this. Now, again, I'm going to put a link to this blog post below. And all the stuff to the right this shows you the most popular blog posts at this time. And it might be different when you go there. So Russell Smith, he came up with this law of threes, and the basics of how Russell's method works is you start from 1296 hertz, so 1296 hertz, and create a descending scale using the ratios provided in his chart. But he did it much like a piano tuner and began at a certain point, jumping from interval to interval according to specific ratios. That's how intervals work. They work based on ratios. And those ratios filled in the notes for each scale. Because each minor third interval is pure according to the ratios Russell used, this creates slight differences in pitches from scale to scale, so the minor third remains close to pure across the board. That, to a non-musician, you're going to go tilt your mind. But basically what I'm saying is if I take a note, la, 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 we'll take for example, and I want to sing a minor or major third above it, I'm going to adjust it vocally so that it sounds correct. But if I take that second note and sing a minor third up from that, chances are I'm going to be modulating to another key and to another concert pitch. So I found that the periodic table weaves in and out of several tunings, aka concert pitches, until they finally get back to the home pitch, which completes the cycle. So here's some final tips and takeaways. We each have a part. Find your part and do that part well. Not everyone has all the answers. Find what's right and discard the rest. Learn to respect others' opinions. We're all on a journey of discovery. And just because it doesn't make sense to you doesn't mean it's wrong. We learn from our mistakes. The best teaching experience is making a mistake and then learning from it. One of the things that we always want to do is we want to seek feedback. We want to reflect on what we've learned. We want to explore new techniques, whether we agree with them or disagree with them. We practice what we're learning. We put the body and soul under the directive of the spirit, which is our highest form of consciousness. If we're always functioning with our intellect and thinking from the intellect only, we are completely discarding consciousness. And this is what academics tend to do. Been there, done that, I know all about it. I mean, I've taught from kindergarten all the way through college, and I've worked along academics my entire life. So I understand how they work. When we point fingers and discredit people, like many, I mean, it's like within 24 hours of when that Terrence Howard video came out, there were a ton of people doing everything they could to discredit what he had to say. When we point fingers and discredit people, we're doing it through our emotions rather than perfect love. Even if we think we've got the scientific facts, there's always another piece. Because remember, I said there's three things that make it work. Chances are academics are look through it on one of the three benches that are required to find the full picture. When we learn to function in perfect love, we'll find the best answers. When we do it out of anger or frustration or any of those things, we're going to fall back into our old patterns of doing it the way we've always learned. And again, I'm just telling you out of experience. It's sad that academics try to discredit anyone they consider uneducated. That is the first thing that came out about Terrence Howard. I don't know who he is. I hear he's an actor, but I don't watch movies that much. I had no clue who he was. So someone had to tell me. This picture that I have here is from Russell Smith, and it's his Universal Cosmic Weave. And it shows the musical frequencies on the side. And these are all the different elements here. And these are the family groups that he talks about. And you just need to get the book if you want to understand it. Many have come out against Terrence since his interview with Rogan. That only discredits those who are making fun of him and pointing out the errors. I mean, there's some who are actually literally making fun of him. Howard has non-musical points that need to be considered. Those I went, that's interesting. I don't understand it, but that's not my piece to understand. My piece to understand was what he said musically. Each person mentioned in this presentation has a part of the puzzle. They all have something that is worth looking at, whether all of it is correct or not. Not even, I'm willing to lay money on it, that there's stuff that I have on my website that I think is accurate that isn't. And when people tell me something isn't accurate, I will go back into that blog post and I will change it. Because I can do that. And I want to make sure that what I present is accurate. We learn from what they each present. And as I said before, I'm going to put a link to my article. Links. There's only one link. But I may put the other articles in there because I have a 7 in the creation, frequencies of creation series. And the periodic table was just the last piece. And I think that is it. So I'm going to stop sharing screen. All right. I encourage everyone watching this to do your own research and find the pieces in your puzzle that are needed for what you're trying to do. If you're just a layperson wanting to understand, realize that not everything you're going to hear is going to be 100% accurate. My piece is to explain the musical parts and to show how the universe works musically, because I truly believe that you can describe how the universe was created and how it functions using music theory. And that's kind of one of my quests. And the other one is to function as a complete being, which is as a spirit, a soul, and a body, as a bench of 3 together, which requires me to sometimes get rid of my stinking thinking and function from a higher position of love so that I can see all the little itty bitty pieces that I might be missing. So with that, happy hunting. We'll see you in the next video.